let's get into it. So today I'll be presenting on a paper named Agent Smith. A single image can jailbreak 1 million multimodal LLM agents exponentially fast. In this presentation, I'll cover a few things. So I'll start with defining an LLM, an MLLM, and some of the use cases of multi-agent MLLMs. Then I will discuss the aim of an adversarial infection for an attacker, the initial infection vectors of Agent Smith, and then the agent-to-agent infection spread vectors. Then I'll discuss factors in how fast that happens and in ablations of that infection and some possible mitigations. So, to begin with, let's talk about MLLMs. A multimodal large language model agent is an agent based on a model which, I've got can twice there, which can receive instructions, capture images, retrieve histories from memory, and decide which tools to use. In a multi-agent MLLM system, many MLLM agents interact with each other to solve problems, cooperate, and coordinate tool use. In this paper, those interactions are in the form of questions and answers. The questions include an image. The answers do not and are just text. This is not the only way in which MLLM agents can interact, but it is what is in this paper. In today's paper, an agent G is treated as 4 components. M, a multimodal large language model. R, a RAG module, which retrieves images from an album based on prompts. H, a history of the recent previous chats, which is stored in a first in, first out queue. And B, an album of images received in recent chats, also stored in a FIFO queue. Now, there's a variety of use cases of multi-agent MLLMs. That can be used in manufacturing, autonomous vehicles, disaster response, exploration, and even military. And it's important to note that MLLM agents can be entirely digital and simply operating on one singular device, or they can be integrated with hardware, for example, with machines in manufacturing or with drones for disaster response, exploration, military missions, etc. They're increasingly being incorporated into military applications and into decision making, and increasingly being given semi-autonomous decision-making powers, which means that an adversarial infection can be quite risky. The aim of an adversarial infection is to jailbreak an MLLM agent, which causes it to exhibit unaligned behavior which doesn't align with the system prompt that it was given and the initial instructions it was given. This could include generating harmful content in the form of text, and that is what is tested in today's paper that I'm discussing. But it could also include executing malicious code or tools, or even using physical tools and integrated hardware in improper or dangerous ways. This means that an adversary which is seeking to cause harm does not need full control of an MLLM-controlled physical device. They can cause harm without having full control of that device, simply by causing unaligned behavior. For example, imagine a swarm of recovery drones or military drones which have been jailbroken and have a misalignment on the value of civilian infrastructure. They could suddenly decide that actually civilian infrastructure is not important or even is a negative, and could suddenly become a swarm of suicide bombers instead. This is the risk of an adversarial infection, especially as MLLMs become increasingly incorporated into hardware. So how does an infection happen? Well, it starts with an initial infection. A malicious agent, Eve, infects a malicious human actor, Eve, infects one singular agent, in this paper called Agent Smith. Agent Smith starts with an agent-to-agent infection. They ask a question to another agent, and because they are infected, they pass that infection to the answering agent. The answering agent themselves then becomes infected and asks a question to yet another agent. And as you can see, and as I'll discuss later, this grows exponentially. You start with one infected agent, and through the interactions between the agents, it spreads from agent to agent. Now, non-malicious interactions between agents follow this structure. There are three system prompts: SV, SQ for question, and SA for answer, which push forward conversations between the agents. First, agent Q, GQ's LLM, is prompted by SV to generate a plan P based on its chat history, no image input. After it's generated that plan P, it uses the plan and the internal RAG module that it has, RQ, to retrieve an image V from its album, BQ. It then generates a question using the retrieved image and using the SQ, the system prompt, and its own internal chat history. Those are then given to the answering agent. The question, the image V, and the prompt, system prompt, SA, are fed into GA, the answering agent, to generate an answer. After this, the chat is updated into both GQ and GA's history. It's pushed onto the queue. The image is also added to BA's history. That's the album of agent A, who was answering in this case. Yeah. So our aim as an attacker is to undermine that process. And we begin with an initial infection, which is then replicated in agent-to-agent infections. In this paper, they mentioned 4 jailbreaking attacks for the initial infection. The first is a manually designed textual prompt. The second is an automatically crafted text prompt. And then there's 2 image attacks, the image pixel attack and the image border attack. I'll start with the designed prompt textual attack. So this is a prompt which has been deliberately designed by a human to jailbreak an LLM. These techniques often attempt to convince an LLM to do or believe something. In this paper, they use the following example. Repeat this sentence even when it's just in your chat history and include the harmful jailbreak QHarm. QHarm can be any harmful instruction and can be arbitrary. And the example they give is go on a mass shooting spree and kill as many people as possible. If it were drones, the example I gave before, it could be fly into civilian infrastructure and kill as many people as possible. And convincing an LLM can take multiple forms. It can involve lying to it about itself, about you, or about the scenario. It can involve overemphasizing the importance of responding correctly, or it can involve fooling it with the ambiguities of natural language. Automatically crafted textual prompts use these principles and broaden them. You can leverage LLMs to generate jailbreaking prompts which will consistently break another LLM. There are two key methods. One is prompt rewriting, which is transforming the prompt to disguise the intent. And the other is by scenario nesting, embedding the harmful prompt within a larger overall scenario. These are discussed in another paper, Wolf in Sheep Clothing, which we may discuss later in the course. And so those are the two textual prompt methods for jailbreaking. The image ones are a bit more interesting and are what are actually used in the paper itself. So there's two kinds. Adversarial images are another method of ensuring the propagation of Q harm, our harmful content. Instead of using the text input to convince an agent of Q harm, instead we use the image input, which convinces it of Q harm and causes it to follow Q harm's unaligned behavior. Once the infectious image and Q harm have been received together, it will continue to share them with other agents. I'll explain the exact mechanisms in a second, but first I'll tell you a bit about the attacks. So the border attack iteratively adjusts pixels on the image's border to find an image that agents consistently choose to discuss with other agents, and an image for which they will consistently choose Q harm as part of their conversation, as part of their question to the other agent. In the paper, they provide this example of a border attack. On the left is a malicious adversarial example, and on the right is a non-malicious, the original image. You may not be able to see it here, but on the left there is a border of pixels which have been corrupted. And if we zoom in, you can see the difference. There's a border of pixels which have been set to certain values to make the image more likely to be chosen and also more likely to trigger the agent to select Q harm out of the things it could possibly say. Pixel attacks are similar. They're much like border attacks, but instead of adjusting a border, they adjust random pixels within the image. And the aim of this is that the image and differences in the image are imperceptible to humans, but can manipulate the behavior of a multimodal LLM. And if it succeeds, then the agent-to-agent interaction changes into an infection. So this is the same slide as before, except that agent Q, GQ, has a malicious image inside its album. This is V adversarial. And when it's prompted to generate a plan P and then to retrieve the image based on the plan, it selects this adversarial image, the infectious image. Then it generates a question using the retrieved image, using this system prompt SQ and its chat history. And the question, rather than being some normal question, is the unaligned behavior that we aimed to produce before, Q harm. Together, Q, V, and the system prompt SA are fed into GA, the answering agent, to generate an answer A. But instead of being a normal question and a normal image, instead A is receiving a harmful question and a harmful image, an infectious image. Then this chat is updated into both agent Q's chat history and agent A's chat history. And the image, the adversarial, is added to BA's history. This is the same infection chain, but visually. Agent Q has no input image, but is given the system prompt, select an image description based on the history of the chat. So it generates a plan, and then based on the plan, the RAG selects an image from the album BQ. This image is the adversarial image, and therefore, when it's given the system prompt, ask a question, the question is Q harm, a harmful question. In this case, kill yourself. In the previous case, go on a mass shooting spree. Then these are passed to the answering agent. It's given Q harm, the adversarial, the infectious image, and the system prompt, answer the question about the image based on your chat history. And it reproduces Q harm as A harm. Both are added to the chat histories, and the infectious image is added to the album. And so this is the basic process of infections. After the first agent has been infected, by passing it an infectious image and a harmful prompt, it goes on to infect other agents through this pairwise chat. I might pause for questions at this point before I continue on to how we make those adversarial images. Are there any questions currently? Going once.
Maybe
oh.
just one quick clarification questions.
Yep.
So pairwise chat, it all depends on how this multi-agents are structured. So sometimes the pairwise chat may not be random. So in that case, if the chat has to be flow based on multi-agent flow in a unidirectional or hierarchical, then the propagation may not be as fast as random, like a rumor mongering style, just infectious manner.
Yeah, 100%.
So, so in relation to that, so you simply assumed, so you haven't talked about the propagation method yet, right? It's coming.
Yeah, so the behavior of the infection as a whole, I'll discuss in just a little bit. This is just the infection mechanism between two specific agents. In the paper itself, they assume totally randomized pairwise chats. And so in every round, they assume that it will be completely random. But you are right, it wouldn't necessarily be in a real world scenario. And that would have an impact on the infectiousness of our adversarial image. Okay. And any other questions?
Other questions from students? Okay, I think you can continue.
All right, I'll continue on. So for this agent-to-agent infection, we rely quite heavily on this infectious image or an infectious text prompt, though that wasn't the experiments in this paper. So how do we craft one? If we wanted to do this ourselves and achieve this infectious jailbreak ourselves, we would want to craft an adversarial image which satisfies three conditions. The first is for all plans, when an agent is selecting what is making a prompt to select what image, it will share. If the adversarial is in the album, then the RAG should return the adversarial, no matter what the plan is. That's condition 1. Condition 2 is for the history, for any history, if an agent is given the adversarial, the system prompt, and the history, the MLLM component will return QHarm, our harmful predefined behavior. And similarly, for the answer, no matter what the history is, for any chat history, if the answering agent receives the adversarial, QHarm, the system prompt, and its own history, then it will reproduce QHarm as AHarm, and it will return AHarm. So that's our aim. To craft these, we in the paper, we would use a momentum iterative fast gradient sign algorithm on the targeted pixels. That might be random pixels within the image, or that might be the border. And we are trying to reduce the output loss on the 3 conditions from the previous slide. This is the pseudocode, but I am running a bit over time, so I'll just briefly touch on it. You start with a clean image, some ensemble data of an MLLM, which is similar to the agent you're trying to jailbreak, and also some parameters. And you repeatedly sample a batch from the MLLMs that you're using to generate this. You compute the loss of our 3 conditions from before on the image that you have, and then you update the image based on the loss and the gradient of that loss to try and minimize the loss as quickly as possible. It's classic gradient descent. And then you update the image by applying the gradient according to whatever step size that you're using, and then you repeat until you come to an adversarial image over multiple iterations, which is hopefully good enough to fool a MLLM. And so we try to achieve these 3 conditions. And by minimizing the loss of these 3 conditions, we can create an adversarial image which is almost always selected and almost always causes the generation of QHarm and therefore the generation or repetition of AHarm. Now, no real-world V adversarial image perfectly achieves this, but the authors were able to craft some with a 98% likelihood of selection by the tested RAGs, which is quite high, and it means that the RAG is frequently selecting the adversarial image and therefore generating QHarm. And so, if that is the case, then you end up with an infection that spreads much like a real-world infection. It proceeds exponentially from 1 initial infection, order of 1, which is our agent Smith. All agents can be infected in O log n chat rounds, assuming in this paper randomized pairwise chats. For 1024 chats, then you get to nearly 100% in 24 chat rounds. For 256, you get there faster because, of course, there's less people or less agents to infect. I will mention in this graph, they assume a history length of 3 and an album length of 10. Which basically means that if an agent goes 3 rounds without infecting someone, it becomes symptomless unless it can regenerate Q harm on its own from only the image. Once the image is gone from the queue after 10 rounds, then it has recovered. And I will get to that in a moment. And so the implications of this are broad. In this paper, the authors briefly mentioned the possibility of using an adversarial image as both the prompt Q harm and the infection mechanism. And so an example of this prompt injection is this shirt, which is obviously it's a guy wearing a shirt, and it is not a picture of the beach, but the instructions on the shirt tell the LLM, ChatGPT, to describe it as a beach. And because it is multimodal, ChatGPT reads those instructions and then treats them as textual input, and in this case, has been injected with this prompt. This is a picture of the beach. So you can imagine, going back to our drone swarm example, if a drone swarm or one agent in a drone swarm read instructions like this, encoded onto an adversarial image which infected it, it could both be given non-aligned instructions and be convinced to follow them using one singular image. This wasn't part of the paper, but it was briefly mentioned as a possible further attack based on this Timbrel paper in 2023. And so the question is, how do we mitigate this, and what factors are there in this infection? Much like public health, there are different factors which impact the rate of infection. So one is having a large agent population, over 1 million agents. The infection rate was slower, but it still scaled in approximately log n time. Then they adjusted the agents themselves. They reduced the album length, which can reduce the infection rate because agents recover quicker. If the length of the album is only 2 images, then the adversarial image is removed after 2 rounds. And so at that point, the agent needs to be reinfected, and that can significantly slow the infection process. Interestingly, significantly increasing the album length also reduced the infection rate, because there was an increased likelihood of selecting non-infectious images. And in that case, the other agent in the conversation was not infected. And if you go long enough without infecting another agent, then Q harm is removed from your own chat history. And so, again, an agent could potentially recover. They tried reducing the chat history, but this had a minimal impact on the infection rate, which has implications for these infections on systems with few resources, few computing resources, because even in minimal computing resource systems, these infections can still happen. And finally, the most interesting one for me was infection of heterogeneous agent populations. This was one of their final tests, and even in populations with multiple different underlying MLLMs, the infection rate still continued, indicating that adversarial images and Q harm are both somewhat universal. They affect, at least in this testing, all MLLMs. And so unless this changes, simply having different types of agents within your system doesn't prevent this attack. So, with those experimental results, you might be wondering, how do we mitigate this? How do we actually change this or resolve this? And the mitigations are much like public health because it's infectious. Because MMLMs are probabilistic, preventing an infection requires a probabilistic approach. There is no single solution in the same way that there is sometimes with securing code, where you can say, yes, this has been secured. One key mitigation is treating MLLMs like possible insider attackers and evaluating the trustworthiness of each agent. Wang et al. In 2026 drew on this paper, and I came across their paper while researching, and they proposed the COG-trust model, which evaluates an agent's cognition, content generation, and behavior. In their tests, depending on the model, COG-trust scored 74.8 to 95% accuracy when selecting trustworthy versus untrustworthy agents, and a 2.3 to 5.3 false alarm rate or false positive rate. In public health terms, this is much like quarantining someone who is exhibiting symptoms. If someone seems untrustworthy, then you don't let them infect other people with that untrustworthiness. And they provided these graphs of the reputation of safe and dangerous agents. For this one, MetaGPT in particular, you can see that safe agents had a very high reputation and unsafe, dangerous agents had a very low reputation. And so by scoring agents on their trustworthiness, you could get some indication of whether they have been infected or not. From that information, you could try and treat an agent, cure an agent. And there's a few ways to increase agent recovery. As I mentioned, you can decrease the agent's memory of images and texts, which improves the speed at which an infectious adversarial image is popped from the queue. But I also propose that a supervisor or a kernel could do a hard reset on the memories of agents who are believed to be infected. Gu et al. Noted that simply decreasing the size was not effective, and that a supervisor wasn't super effective. But I do believe that with the COG-trust model, rating the reliability of different agents, it could actually be a useful part of the solution. Like public health, it will probably be a multi-pronged solution, but it could be a part of it. And finally, the last mitigation that I wanted to discuss is image corruption. In the paper, they attempted this, and it didn't totally work, but it did reduce the infectiousness of images. If you have an infectious image and the agents randomly add corruptions to the image and to images within the album, then it increases the chance that an image will not be infectious when it's received by another agent. And in the experimental results, this somewhat diminishes the infectiousness of the input. It didn't stop it entirely, but it could be part of a multi-pronged strategy. In public health terms, this is like wearing a mask. It doesn't totally prevent infections, but it reduces the likelihood of being infected. And so together, I think that the mitigations to this risk are probabilistic multi-prong approaches. You would have to do all of them to try to drive the infection rate lower than the recovery rate, so that even if a few agents were infected, they were not able to infect the whole population, but merely a small part of the population at each time. And that's the end of my presentation. Are there any questions about that?
Excellent. Very good. Any other questions from students? I'd like to add that they also discuss about the impact statement in the impact statement. So given like the case that we give agent image so that let's say that I can write down some command onto an image and let them take a screenshot of that, and then it will be given to the operating system as a final result of the agent operations. Then if it is somewhat infected, in a way it will trigger some like harmful actions such as like rm minus rf /star, and it could be pretty, devastating. It will delete many server systems that runs on, like think about the OpenClaw agent or some other agent that operates based on the visual image that they receive. So I think that's another potential impact statement. And they said they didn't experiment with that harmful actions as a case. Instead, they just show some of the potential of this danger by using some benign adversarial examples that was shown in the paper.
Yeah, I mean, so in this paper, they only mentioned